Okay, good evening. Thanks for coming. It seemed like Pesach cleaning is more popular than Seder night. No, it's not. Okay. The Shiur is going to be Leil Nishmas, Yaakov Arya, Yaakov Binyamin Ben Yibodel L'chaim Tovim Rachamim, Shbe'il Neshama, and we should only share in the Surah's Tovus. So let's begin talking about the Seder. The main, the Shiur is going to mainly revolve around very practical halachas. Some you may have heard of already, some may be new. Also, I'll give some tips to the Seder, and again, depending on the time, we'll see, how much time we have maybe to give, one or two thoughts about the Seder. But just briefly discussing Seder night in general, Pesach is a time where it is the time, not just a time where we can instill emunah into ourselves, into our children, which will last them a lifetime. It's a tremendous opportunity and also an awesome responsibility. The Gaz Tolebincha is one of the mitzvahs on Pesach, to tell our son, it's the essence of what it is to be a Jew, to be a link in our glorious chain, to pass on to our children what we heard from our fathers, what they heard from their fathers, who heard from their fathers, all the way back to Yetzias Mitzrayim. I just saw yesterday, someone sent me a poll where they asked people if they can say the name of their great-grandfather. Do you know who your great-grandfather was? They said 97% of people could not name their great-grandfather, which is mind-boggling, right? And Baruch Hashem, Yidden, you ask most Yidden who their great-grandfather is, you can tell us, we can say who our great-grandfather is. It's part of the Messiah. It's been passed on. Our father heard from their father, heard from their father. It's all part of this Messiah. Since Yetzias Mitzrayim, passed on from generation to generation, and that is the essence of our emunah, that is the core of our emunah. So much so that Rabbi Rucham Levovitz says an amazing idea. In Shoftim, in Sefer Shoftim, so the first few prokim talk about Klal Yisrael did Avodah Zarah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished them, set them into Golus, they did Teshuvah, and copy-paste quite a few times. And the story is, in Perek Vov, they're being persecuted by Midian. And the Sefer tells us, the Sefer Shoftim tells us that a Malach came to Gideon. Gideon was the Shofet at the time, Gideon ben Yoash. He was the Shofet, he was the Navi. And he appears to Gideon, Vayireh Elav Malach Hashem, Vayireh Elav Hashem Imcha Gibor HaChoyel. And Gideon answers back, Vayireh Elav Gideon. Hi Adoni, V'yesh Hashem imonu, is Hashem really with us? Why are we in such difficult straits? Why are we seeing such difficulties? Where are all the wonders which our fathers told us about? Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu has delivered us into the hands of our enemies. And Rashi says something so profound. Rashi says, Asher sipru lonu avoseinu. Pesach oil. This story where the Malach came to Gideon happened on Pesach. Omaloi, emesh hikrani abo es halil. Yesterday, my father told me over the Halil. V'shamativ shehoya oimer b'tzeis Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. I heard him saying b'tzeis Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. V'aton netashnu tzadikim hoya avoseinu yaslan b'skusom. If our forefathers were if we are tzaddikim like our forefathers, do niflois for us as well. If Yerucham points something out so profound, who was the story happening with? It was Gideon ben Yoash. Gideon was a Novi. He was a shofet. He was a judge. Who was his father? Yoash was an Oived Avodah Zarah. Nevertheless, Gideon's entire belief system, his entire emunah, came from the fact that yesterday my father told me, B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. That's the core of our emunah. We see from here how important it is. Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim, Be'egad Tolebincha, to tell our children and our grandchildren about Mitzrayim. Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. That is the essence of the night. That is the whole essence of the Seder night, to instill that emunah into our children. And therefore, in order to utilize every single moment of Seder night, prepare everything you can before Seder. Because every single minute, this is a halacha, but also good advice, every single minute of Seder night is gold, it's so precious. And this year, it's more difficult. This year, Erev Pesach is Shabbos. And we're going to discuss on Shabbos some more details of exactly what you have to prepare before Shabbos and what happens if you don't prepare it. Maybe we'll discuss in this year as well. But everything you can do before Shabbos, have ready before Shabbos. Open your box of matzahs, have it open, choose your wines, choose which haggadahs you're going to use. If possible, again, it might not be convenient, but if you end up eating in the kitchen or in the garden or something else on the Shabbos of Erev Pesach, have the Seder table already ready, laid out before Shabbos. So when you come home on Motzei Shabbos and you come home on Yom Tov night, you can start your Seder as soon as possible. Even have a table plan. Don't, sometimes you come home from shul and you can spend like 45 minutes, an hour, till the Seder actually starts. Where's everyone sitting? What haggadah should we use? What wine should we use? Where are our matzahs? Where's my kittel? What pillow should we use? Have everything ready. Start your Seder as soon as possible. Now, another halacha brought in Shulchan Aruch is that your nicest utensils should be used for Seder night. The Mishnah Berurah recounts that I think the Ramah writes actually, the Maharil was the greatest Rishon of his time in Ashkenaz. The Maharil was also a moneylender, which was the business of the day in those days. And Maharil had many mashkoinos, many deposits, nice silver items from goyim who would deposit it by him while they borrowed the money, and he would display it on his Seder table. He wouldn't use it because it was a mashkin, but he would at least display it. That's all part of the chayrus, and it's not just part of the chayrus, but it's part of what makes the Seder be memorable to our children. The Seder has to be something which stays in our children's minds for the rest of their life. It has to be the most memorable memory of their childhood. I can't say this for sure, but I'm sure there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Yidden in the world now who are ma'aminim, might not be shomei Torah mitzvahs, but they believe in Hashem, they're ma'aminim because of the Seder they experienced in their childhood, when they heard from their father, they heard from their grandfather. That is really the whole purpose of this night. Okay, so that's just Seder night in general. Let's talk some halachas about Seder, about leaning. So now, we all know that you have to lean on your left side, and there's two reasons given. One reason given is because it's more comfortable. Why is it more comfortable? Because if you're eating with your right hand, right, so if you're leaning like this, it's very hard to eat. When you're leaning on your left hand, on the left side, it's more comfortable to eat. That's derech cherus, right? The whole point of derech cherus is to be an aristocrat, to make it more comfortable, not to make it less comfortable. Another reason, famously, is in case it goes shema yakdim konol aveshet. Instead of going down your esophagus, right, it goes down the trachea, right? Okay, so the question is now, what's the main reason? Now, why would it make a difference? I don't know if there's any lefties in the room, right? You're a lefty, okay. So what does a lefty do? Because if the main reason is the first reason, which is it's more comfortable, so then a lefty should lead to his right, because it's hard to eat like that. If the reason is because it might go down the wrong way, then he should also lean to his left. And the place can say that left-handed people also lean to the left because the main reason is the reason of sakana, that it might go down the wrong pipe. Now, it needs to be derech cherus. The mistake a lot of people make is they get a chair like this, right? And it's hard to lean on a chair like this, and they end up doing acrobatics mid-air, right? That's not derech cherus, right? Chazal didn't want it to be like this, about to fall off your chair. And if you eat like that, it's not considered eating the heseba. So therefore, try and get yourself a chair if it's got armrests or even just a higher back, something that you can lean on comfortably, but your body shouldn't be mid-air. An elderly or ill person who finds it very hard to lean is parted from leaning because for him it's not considered derech cherus to lean, and therefore he does not have to lean. But just remember that, okay, we're going to discuss in a second what happens if you forget to lean. Now the Ramah says, this is another halacha which is less known, is that ideally if you can, if it's not comfortable then you don't have to, but ideally if you can, really the whole Shulchan Aruch, you should also lean. It's all part of the Seder night, and therefore you should lean. However, when you're saying the haggadah, that has to be said with a bit more of a kovid roish. It has to be, it's when you bench, when you make brachas, then you shouldn't lean, right? So when you eat, when you have your kos or you have your matzah, you should actually say your bracha sitting straight, and then only lean after the bracha. Now, when it comes to women, there's a shaila. If they have to do a seber, they're pots from a seber, right? So again, when it comes to Sfaradim, I believe no woman lean. When it comes to Ashkenazim, so then some women do lean, some women don't lean. Everyone should follow their minhag, but I would point out that even for those that the women don't lean, this is the only mitzvah on the entire night of Leil HaSeder that women are potter from. Every single other mitzvah, women are chayev just as much as men, saying the whole Sipi Yitzias Mitzrayim, saying the Haggadah, matzahs, 4 cups of wine, etc., which we'll discuss all the details soon. And I'll point out that often what happens is that a woman after matzah, when she's eating her matzah, she's thinking about the first course, right? It's burning or whatever, I have to get out of the oven, and she starts eating the matzah, and then she'll jump up to start seeing what's going on in the kitchen. Even if women don't have to lean, they have to eat matzah. And for them, the derech is to at least sit straight, right? To be running around eating a matzah, you don't fulfill your obligations. So women have to be very careful that even if they're not leaning, they're at least sitting down, eating the matzah, and only afterwards to get up and help prepare the meal, or do whatever they're doing. Okay, that's regarding Hesed, but let's now talk about some general halachas regarding the 4 koses, the 4 cups of wine. Now, since the 4 cups of wine on Seder night, there's only a mitzvah d'Rabbanon, it's not a d'Oraisa, therefore, one can rely on the smaller shiur of how much he has to drink. When it comes to shiurim, some people, Rabbi Chaim Noah, some hold that the shiur of Revius is 86 milliliters, as opposed to the Chazon Ish, who says that the shiur is 150 milliliters. Right? Rabbi Yosef was once giving a shiur, and he said in Ivrit, "Hashiurim shel Chazon Ish v'sei why barosh." Right? How can you drink 4 cups of wine, 150 milliliters? You're drunk by the end of Seder. Right? So again, they have the smaller shiurim, but everyone can rely on the smaller shiurim because it's only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Besides, if Pesach falls on Friday night for the first cup, some people are makbid to have a bigger shiur because it's kiddush. But otherwise, you can have a small shiur. And it's sorry. No, so I'm saying if Pesach would fall on Friday night, then some people are makbid for the first kos. But this year, again, you can have the smallest shiur. Now, it's also important to note that the kos, when you make all 4 koses, has to be full. And you also have to drink preferably the whole cup, or at least most of the cup. Which means if you have a big goblet, right, which is 500 milliliters, right, you use the kosher eliyah for yourself, right, and it's a half-liter cup. It's not enough just to drink the shiur of 86 or 150 milliliters. You have to drink at least 251 milliliters, right? If you have 4 of those cups, I don't want to be in your house on Seder night, right? So therefore, be sensible, and you can use a smaller becher, which only has 86 milliliters, but rather get a smaller becher than a bigger becher if you don't think you're going to be able to at least have most of the kos for all the 4 koses. Now, how quickly do the koses have to be drunk? So we're going to come to the amount of time when it comes to matzah, but ideally the shiur is how long it takes to drink a revius of fluid, which is a few seconds, right? It's 2 swallows, right? You drink a cup of water, 2 swallows, that's generally how long it takes to drink water. That's how long you should drink your wine, right? You're not supposed to sit there sipping your wine. You're supposed to drink it in the space of a few seconds. But the eved, you can rely on the regular shiur of Kidei Achilas Pras, the same shiur that we give to food, which is anywhere between 2 and 9 minutes, which we'll discuss soon when we get to matzah. Now, although generally on Shabbos and Yom Tov, we're not allowed to measure, right? Measuring is an Issa d'Rabbanon. When it comes to mitzvahs, you want to measure how big your becher is. You want to measure your matzah. Obviously, not on electric scales, right? But you want to measure your matzah. You're allowed to do that on Yom Tov. Ideally, one should drink red wine as opposed to white wine. We know Zeichel Adam, to remember the Dan. Also, because red wine is considered more choshev than white wine. Now, what happens if you don't like red wine, only like white wine? So what some people do is they put a bit of red wine to make it look red. But there are some people that say there's an issue of coloring food on Shabbos. It's a big machlokes. And therefore, what they say is you should first put in the red wine and then put in the white wine. As in first put in the darker color and then the lighter color, and that's not called coloring. But to put in the red wine after the white wine is problematic because you're turning it red. Therefore, you should do it the other way around. Non-mavushal wine is preferred to mavushal. Again, if you like mavushal, that's okay. But if one can use non-mavushal wine, then you should use that. The reason is because the nesachim they used in the Beis Hamikdash for the kabbanos was non-mavushal. So as a zeicha for that, we use non-mavushal wine. I would add, some people they use non-mavushal wine and they mix it with pasteurized grape juice. So you'll still have lost the whole point, because the whole point is to have non-mavushal. You can buy, I think, the glass bottles of kedem is non-mavushal, so you can actually buy non-pasteurized, non-mavushal grape juice, which you can use as well if you prefer. Now, what should one drink on Seder night? Now, ideally, the poskim say, most poskim, they should try and have wine for 2 reasons. First of all, wine is more derecherus, right? The whole point of Seder night is to feel like an aristocrat, and therefore one should try and have wine. Now, if you really don't like wine, you detest wine, you can't drink it, then almost all the places can say you can have grape juice, but what a lot of them do say is that you should at least mix a bit of wine in, that should at least have the taste of wine. Most places say that women can have grape juice, and that is fine. Now, there is a minhag, which I think a lot of people get wrong, which everyone thinks that everyone has to have somebody else pouring for them, right? People do that at home. Now, I'm not going to mock that minhag if you have that minhag, but the Ramah actually said it's only a din in the Bal Habayis. The Ramah brings it down. The Ramah says that the Bal Habayis, the person leading the Seder, there's a minhag to have somebody else pouring his full cases. But again, it seems to be somehow a minhag in Klal Yisrael where everyone pours for each other. I don't know how it's derech eretz for me to be your slave and you to be my slave. I'm not sure, but that seems to be the minhag in Klal Yisrael. What about regards to chinuch? How old are children in regards to how old? When should you start being mechanech your children in drinking daled kaises? I saw a very interesting chiddush. The Shulchan Aruch Harav says it depends which kais we're talking about. Meaning, we know the first kais is kiddush, the second kais is the haggadah, the third kais is benching, and the fourth kais is halal. So he says, depending on the child's understanding, if he understands what Yom Tov is, he understands a basic concept that Yom Tov is a holy time, you have to be mechanech him in the first case of Kiddush. If he understands that Mitzrayim, maybe a drop old days, 5, 6 years old, he's heard about Yitzias Mitzrayim, the second case, and so on and so forth. If he benches already, that's the Shiur Chinuch when it comes to children. When it comes to matzah, the Rambam says that once a child starts eating bread already, you should give him matzah to eat. Okay, that's regarding the four. You do not have to give him a sheikh hasmish. Absolutely not. You can even give him a shimatzah. I'm kidding. Okay, let's talk about the Seder plate. Now we know the Seder plate has the zroya, the shank bone, the baits of the egg as a zeicha for the chagiga, the moro, the chazeres, the salt water, the charoses, and the karpas. Sorry, that was the wrong order. But those are the 7 things that one has on the Seder plate. A few important halachas. One should roast the egg this year and the zroya before Shabbos. Right? One should roast it before Shabbos. If one only roasts the zroya on Yom Tov, you have to make sure to eat it on Yom Tov. Why? Because just roasting it to have on your Seder plate is not called a bishul l'tzorech Yom Tov. And therefore, if you're cooking it only on Motzei Shabbos, you should actually make sure to eat it. And actually, the Mishnah Berurah says that, and in general, people don't do this for some reason. But the Mishnah Berurah says, in general, you should try and eat the zroya bone, even if cooked before Shabbos, because it's a zilzal to go and throw it away. And therefore, the zroya bone, and actually a connected halacha is, people often just buy a bone, right, or a shank bone. The zroya bone, the Mishnah Berurah says, has to have a kazayas of meat on it, right? There's supposed to be a bone with at least a bit of meat on it, right? It's a zeicha for the carbon pesach, so it's supposed to have at least a bit of meat on it, and ideally you want to try anyway to eat it. There's a minhag to eat the egg during Shulchan Aruch, either a zeicha for the chagiga or as a simon or as a zeicha of avelus, because unfortunately nowadays we haven't got the carbon pesach. Okay, let's move on to Kaddish. Let's move on to Kaddish. Okay, one should have in mind when he makes the first bracha, the first kos, to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush and the first of the 4 cups of wine. So there's 2 mitzvahs going on here. And when he says shechiyona during Kiddush, you should have in mind all the mitzvahs of Seder night. And one should also have in mind when he makes the bracha of Baruch Priagofen in Kiddush, one should have in mind that if he wants to be able to have more grape juice and wine, he can. Why does that help? Because the whole shiloh, what happens if one, let's say, forgets to lean when he has that first cup of wine? The problem is one isn't supposed to have more than 4 cups of wine, at least not to make a bracha on more than 4 cups of wine during Seder night. The problem of ein meisifin ala kaises. It's supposed to have 4 kaises and not 5 kaises. If you don't make a bracha, you can drink more. So therefore, what the Mishnah Berurah says one should do is have in mind when you make your first bracha of agofen, that if I want to drink more wine, I can drink more wine. Therefore, you don't have to make a bracha, and therefore, if you forget to lean, one can have another kos, and it doesn't have to make a new bracha. Now, although we know that when we make havdalah, we generally spill out some wine because it's a simon for bracha. On Yom Tov, we don't do that because it's a zilzul for Yom Tov, and therefore we don't spill out wine. And as we know, there's an order. The order of making kiddush is yak nahaz, which is yayin, first the bracha of hagofen, then kiddush, then ner, then the bracha of havdalah, and then finally the shechionu. Now, interestingly, regarding the candles, nowadays they sell in the shops yak nahaz candles, right, which is a candle with 2 wicks, which people use for Havdalah. Now, if you use a Yak Nahas candle as what to rely on, I personally don't believe, again, let's go back a step. One can totally be fulfill his Shiur of Havdalah, of the candle, on a one-wick candle, right? There's a chumrah to have an avukah, there's a chumrah to have 2 or more wicks. Now, the question the post can discuss is that chumrah important enough to light a candle on Yom Tov? Meaning, we know you're only allowed to light a havara, which is a tzarech, it's a tzarech Yom Tov, right? So to light this Yak Nahas candle, this 2-wick candle for Havdalah, is that important of enough reason? Because technically you can use a Yom Tov candles. Yeah? The woman's lit the Yom Tov candles, you can use that for Havdalah. Many people do that. To carry light an extra candle, many persons say you shouldn't. The eitzah, which I would give, the tip is let's say you're going to have, let's say, a 24-hour candle from before Shabbos. So take the Yak Nahas candle, right, and light it from that candle and use that to light the Yom Tov candle. So if you use that to light the Yom Tov candles, you're not doing it shloi tzarich. Instead of using a match, use the 2-wick candle to light the rest of the candle. And now I've got a Yak Nahas candle to use for Havdalah. Now, regarding drinking during Magid, if one is thirsty before the meal, before he gets to Shulchan Aruch, he's allowed to have a drink. But as we said, ideally, you shouldn't have wine or grape juice. Now, they discuss eating. It's better not to eat in order that one should have an appetite for matzah. If one is very hungry, you can have a small snack. Let kids eat, right? You want them to be alert, right? The halach is you're supposed to give sweets, you're supposed to give snacks to the kids to keep them alert and focused during the Seder. Okay, that's Kaddish. Urchatz, so we know that we wash our hands for the karpas. Now, ideally, one shouldn't speak in between urchatz and karpas. The same way that one doesn't speak between washing your hands for bread and eating the bread. So ideally, one also shouldn't speak between urchatz and karpas, unless it's for the sake of karpas, like if you pass me the potatoes or cucumbers or whatever you use. Now, karpas, interestingly, the whole point of karpas is washing your hands, right, before you dip vegetables into salt water. Although nowadays we don't do it, right? In the olden days they used to do it, right? So we wash our hands in order to dip the vegetable into the salt water. Now, if you wash your hands and then you take a fork, right, and pierce the potato and put it in the salt water, so you're sort of losing the whole reason why you've washed your hands in the first place. So therefore, many places can say your hands are clean now, it's okay. Take the radish or the cucumber or the potato, whatever you use, and it's better to dip it in with your hands. As we know, when we make the bracha, one is supposed to also have in mind the morrow, eat less than the kazaya, so you don't have the issue of bracha achreina. Machlokes whether to lead or not, everyone should follow their family minhag in regards to karpas. Okay, then we have yachatz. Again, we break the matzah because what's the reason why I break the matzah? The reason is because one is supposed to eat lechem oini. Lechem oini is something which is a prusa, a broken piece of matzah. The derech of an oni is not to have an entire whole matzah, and therefore it's better to have and therefore the reason why we crack it is to have a piece of matzah. The bigger piece is kept for the afikomen, and the reason is because many opinions hold that the main achilas matzah is actually the afikomen, and one has to actually eat more matzah in the afikomen, believe it or not, than the first kazayas of the matzah, which we'll discuss when we get there. Okay, let's briefly discuss Magid. So again, this year is a perfect opportunity. Shabbos is Erev Pesach. Children especially and adults should have a good shluf on Erev Pesach, to be alert, to be awake. Now we know, of course, the highlight of Magid in most homes is the Manishtana. The tune of Manishtana Halayla Zeh did not get invented by kindergarten teachers, but the Marili already says that there's a minhag to sing the Manishtana, right, to show a love for the Manishtana, to sing it. Now, what a lot of people do is they say, okay, Yankee, you can stay up till after the Manishtana, right? After the Manishtana, you're in bed. I had enough of you, right? Out to bed. Now, if you're doing that to your kids, you've literally lost the entire purpose of Ve'egal Tolebincha and Sipiyat Yas Mitzrayim. Because Manishtana is the question, right? You've got to answer the question, right? To put the kids to bed after Manishtana is really defeating the entire purpose. And let's talk about Magid briefly. We have to remember the main chiyuv of Magid is to relive and retell the nisim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for us in Mitzrayim. You may have a son home from yeshiva and he's got a 10-page write-up about Reb Chaim Soloveitchik's 2 dinim and Sipi Yitzias Mitzrayim. That's lovely and that's fantastic, and it's great that he wants to say that. Perhaps advise him to keep it for another Yom Tov meal or Shulchan Aruch, and of course don't chas v'shalom discourage him from sharing Divrei Torah. But the point of Yitzias of Seder night and Magid is for a father and for children as well to share. But the point is to talk about HaKadosh Baruch Hu did tremendous nisim for us, to feel what it was like to be a slave, to feel what it was like to be taken out of Mitzrayim. They say a story that the Baal Shem Tov once had a vision that he had a dream, or he had a vision that there's a peasant, a villager living somewhere whose Seder is more choshev in Shemayim than the Baal Shem Tov's own Seder. Wow, I've got to go see this Seder. Baal Shem Tov went, and this simple villager, a very unlearned man, and he sits there and he's telling his children there was an evil king called Paroi who was mean to us, and Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, drank a cup of wine. Said it again, drank another cup of wine. That was literally his entire Seder. Hashem Tov said that Emunah Pshuta. Just talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim doesn't have to be fancy Divrei Torah. Those are also nice, but just talking about it, retelling it, reliving it, discussing it. And therefore, it's important to put in as much detail and description. Allow a child's imagination to run free. You know, it's very nice having props. Props are great, right? Have some frogs flying around. Those are all great, but they're not anywhere near as good as a child's own imagination. And it's really up to us as parents, as grandparents, to go through the Midrashim, to go through a Haggadah, to discuss what it was like in Mitzrayim, what the Shibud was like, what the persecution was like, what the Makkahs were like. You have to go through these Midrashim and these Chazal, and where they talk about all the stories of Mitzrayim, so you can discuss it with your child, encourage your child, you know, imagine what it's living in Mitzrayim, imagine what it was like leaving Mitzrayim, you know, get him to use his imagination, get him to really live it. You know, what happens often is that we get so caught up in Holach Ma'aniyo and Manishtano and the beginning of the Seder and Omer Belozman, and by the time it gets to the main parts of the Seder, which are Pesach, Matzah, Moro, talking about Pesach, talking about Matzah, talking about Moro, or Dayenu, or the Makkahs, talking about the 10 Makkahs and going through them one by one and describing them in vivid detail. Usually by the time we get up to that part of the Seder, Chatzos, we got to rush, right? So pace yourself, understand that's the most important part of the Seder. That's what Pesach night is all about. Okay. I'll just say though, on the other hand, temper your expectations, right? Very often we prepare before Pesach, we have the whole bunch of different Torah prepared, we imagine in our minds, well, my child's going to sit there beautifully, right? Not fidgeting, straight backed, right? Elbows off the table, and he's going to sing Manishtana so sweetly, which he never does, right? And we're going to get in beautiful, so nice, right? And often, you know, the kids are crawling under the table and they're pulling at your although we have to prepare as much as possible. If it doesn't turn out the way we expected it, it's also okay. Let kids be kids. Now, one final halacha in regards to Magid. I'm not going to go through all the halachas of Magid, but one final halacha is that Magid has to be understood. Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim has to be fully understood. In fact, in halacha it says that the re-melondrus, right, is Londra is French for London. And the re-melondra used to tell over the Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim to his family, the Loshen. Now, I don't know if his Loshen Laz was French, which is where he was originally from, or if it was English. But the point is that he said it over either in English or French. And the point is for children, for your wives, for everyone to understand what's going on. And therefore, it can even be said in English. It does not have to be said in Loshen HaKodesh. Okay, let's talk about let's move on to Rochza. Now, you know, many people have a minhag in the Seder to call out the simon before each one. Kadesh, Urchat, Karpas, or the kids have something on it. So Moitzi Matzah should get called out, obviously, before Rochza. We don't want to make any hefsek between Rochza and Moitzi Matzah. Okay, let's move on to Moitzi Matzah. When one makes a bracha of alachilas matzah, he should also have in mind the afikoyim, right? Because it could well be, we'll discuss it a bit more in a second, it could well be that one fulfills his main obligation of eating matzah with the afikoyim matzah, and therefore when he makes the bracha, he should have in mind, I'm also having in mind the afikoyim matzah. The Shla HaKadosh says, Mishnah Berurah quotes this, the Shla HaKadosh used to kiss his matzahs, to show his love for the mitzvah, to show his love for the matzahs. Matzahs are called Nama de Mehemnusa, the bread of Emunah. It's the only mitzvah in the entire Torah, nowadays at least, which involves eating, right? Eating actually mekayim a mitzvah, and therefore, eating in a sukkah, but I'm talking about the actual thing that you're eating is a mitzvah, and therefore it's something which is very chashuv, and one has to, and therefore the Shlomo he used to kiss it to show his love for the matzah. Now, what do? We make a bracha of hamaitzi holding all three matzahs, right? The broken matzahs in between the two other matzahs. And then when you make the second bracha of al achilas matzah, so you drop the bottom matzah. Now, why do you still have to hold onto the top matzah when you make the bracha of al achilas matzah? Because there's a shaila, which bracha goes on which. Some people say the bracha of hamaitzi goes on the whole matzah, and al achilas matzah goes on the broken matzah. Some people say the other way around. Therefore, we hold both matzahs when you are making the second bracha, and you just drop the bottom matzah. So too, when you break the matzahs, they should both be broken together. Now, how much matzah should one eat? So before we talk about how much matzah one should eat and how quickly one should eat matzah, I'll point something out. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach used to say that, if you want to be a real brisker, right, and you want to eat, I don't know how many kazesim of matzah in the space of 13 seconds or whatever it is, then it's very possible you're not yotzi your whole mitzvah of matzah. Why? Because if it reaches the stage when it's considered achile gasa, where I'm just like, I'm not eating it the way a normal person bichlal eats, then one doesn't fulfill its obligations. One also, although again we try and eat it quickly and we try and eat a certain amount of matzah, one has to be mindful for that as well. Now, how much should we eat? So the ikar adin is, and we'll discuss the amounts in a second, one should have a kazayis of matzah. Now, some people are machmir to have 2 kazesim. Now, I'll point out the only person who has to have 2 kazesim is somebody, even according to this chumrah, is somebody who's eating from the matzahs in the kaira. Why? Because the whole reason to have 2 kazesim is you want to have 1 kazayis from the hamaitzi matzah of the lechem mishnah and 1 kazayis from the broken matzah. So there's a chumrah to have 2 kazesim. What happens in most family homes is there's not enough matzah in the Seder plate for everyone. So people take other matzahs. And therefore, anyone else who's taking other matzah definitely does not have to have 2 kazesim, and 1 kazayis is enough. But if you do have 2 kazesim, they should be eaten at the same time together, so there shouldn't be a hefsek, right? Because again, we don't know which bracha is going on which matzahs. Therefore, make the both brachas, hamaitzi and achilas matzah, and then eat both kazesim at the same time, unless your family minhag is to do so, which some people do have the minhag. Matzah should not be dipped into salt on Seder night because we don't want to nullify the taste of the matzah, and therefore we don't dip it into salt. How quickly should matzahs be eaten? The shiur, as we said before, is kedei achilas pras. Now, the ideally, if one can, some place can say they should be within 2 minutes, right, which is pretty quick. If that's too quick, then 4 minutes is totally okay as well. In a case of great need, it should at least be within 9 minutes. Now, there's a very So we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss that in a second. So I'm discussing that now. We said that we know that one has to eat lechem oini on Pesach, right? Lechem oini has 2 explanations. Lechem oini has the explanation that it's a poor man bread, and therefore one has to have a broken piece of matzah. And then also Chazal say lechem she'oinin alav dvarim harbe. It's a lechem which people say that Haggadah Shel Pesach. People talk about Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim over this matzah, and therefore there's some very practical halachas which come out. Number 1, any matzah which is eaten as your kazesim on Seder night should be on the table during Magid, which means even if you're not eating from the balabais' 3 matzahs, the rest of the matzah which you plan on using for the kazesim should also be on the table. That's number 1. Number 2, as you pointed out, Mark, right? Everyone should try and have a bit of the lechem oini, a bit of the prusa, because of the first explanation of lechem oini, which is a broken piece of matzah. So everyone should have a bit of the lechem mishnah first of all. Everyone's trying to have a bit of the top matzah to be yotzi the mitzvah of lechem mishnah, right? Everyone should have a bit of like every Shabbos. You give part of the lechem mishnah to everyone, and then everyone should also have a bit of the broken. So what happens if there's not enough of the broken matzah, the middle matzah, which is often the case for everyone on the table? So then the place can say you should make sure that when the matzah when the matzah which you're using for which we said should be on the table during Magid, some of it should also be broken. Because that doesn't have to be the broken matzah which you have in your Seder plate. The point is that it's a broken matzah. So when the bracha is made, some of the other matzah, if you haven't got enough of your middle matzah to give to everyone, then some of the other matzah at that point when the bracha is made should already be broken. But as we said, ideally, if you have enough matzah to give a bit to everyone, then that is fine.
You can't just give a very small bit.
Usually there's enough to go around. In the case when you have a massive Seder, there's enough to go around. That's right. Now I'll give you
when you're going to break them, then you should at that point break some. just put
No,
the
yeah, you could
table.
just break a matzah before the bracha is made. Have a broken matzah lying on the table.
So
Again,
but yeah.
Sorry?
Supposed to be from the same
Well,
thing.
afikomen is yachat, right? Oh, so we'll discuss soon what happens if you lose your afikomen, right? Well, if you have to especially eat from that or not, when we get to afikomen. But just okay, practically, how much does it have to be? So I'm not going to go through all the reasons why and etc. But ideally, what the size of a kazayis ideally should be, again, kazayis is measured in volume, not in weight. So I'm going to give you the volume, and I'm going to tell you more or less the weight, but it's not universal because it depends on the thickness of the matzah, right? Because it depends on volume, it's not always necessarily going to be the same. Now, the volume which we eat in matzah is ideally the bigger shiur, which, because it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, so we go by the bigger shiur of a kazayis, is 50 cubic centimeters. 50 cubic centimeters, approximately in grams, is about 25 grams of matzah, or a bit more than that. The smaller shiur is 28.8 cubic centimeters, which is about 15 grams. Now, if you're machmir to have 2 kazesim for your first matzah, you definitely don't have to have 2 chazan-ish kazesim, 2 large kazesim. 2 small kazesim, i.e. about 56 cubic centimeters, or about 28 to 30 grams of matzah, definitely is enough. In other words, even if you have 2 kazesim, it don't have to be 2 chazan-ish kazesim, unless you're a massive brisker, but you definitely don't have to have 2 chazan-ish kazesim. Now, practically speaking, what does that mean? So I don't know if you use koimiyas matzah. And on a koimiyas matzah, an average koimiyas matzah is about 90 grams. So as you said, if you want to have 25 grams, so ideally you should have the bigger shiur, it's about a third, or just under a third of the matzah. If you're using a classic machine matzah, it's about 2/3, obviously they're much smaller, then it's about 2/3 of that matzah to have a kazais. Now, somebody that can't eat, he's got a stomachache, etc., you can for sure rely on the smaller shiur. The smaller shiur is about the smallest shiur, so we said is 28.8 cubic centimeters, about 15 grams, so it's about half of the bigger shiur. Now, somebody in a case of a great need, somebody's very sick, somebody's very elderly, then if Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is a chiddush, you can rely on a kazayis shebiyomin. Again, because what's the weight of an olive nowadays? Think of olive, 3, 4, max 5 grams, right? So what's all this 15, 30, what on about, right? The reason is because the olden days, the kazesim then, they had bigger olives. But Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says in the case of really great need, you should only rely on this in the case of really great need. You can rely on a kazayis nowadays, which 5 grams is definitely enough.
So the other matzah you put on the table,
yeah,
when you bring the seder, it's cover and
yeah. Whenever you cover or uncover the matzahs, they should also, all the matzahs that should be there. Yeah. Now, I'll give you a quick tip, right, just to help with the whole matzah, especially if you have a large amount of people by your table, is to prepare appropriate kazesim. So let's say the men are having a bigger kazayis and the women are having a smaller kazayis. You can prepare it all in labeled bags before Shabbos. And all you have to do by Motzi matzah is add a bit of your matzah in each bag, and you're good to go, right? Instead of having to start measuring and how big it is, right? It can be very time consuming, and the shayla of a hefsek and etc. The easy way is you can easily prepare those kazesim before Yom Tov or before Shabbos as well. Okay, as is known, one shouldn't be mafsik until after Koirech, because that's all going back to the original bracha of Hamaitzi. Let's quickly discuss morrow. Chazal gave 5 types of morrow in order of preference: lettuce, chicory, horseradish. The 4th is bitter herbs. We're not sure exactly what it is, and the 5th again is just called morrow. We're not sure exactly what that is. Now, ideally, one should have lettuce because it goes in order of preference, and the first one we said is lettuce. Now, many people though have the minhag to use horseradish, which is also fine. It's also in that list. What lettuce should one use? Ideally, romaine lettuce. The Shailif iceberg lettuce is considered the lettuce that Chazal were talking about because it's sweet, it's not as bitter. So ideally, one should use romaine lettuce. I actually heard Sarah Bonham say you should use endive. I think you pronounce it lettuce, right? Which is much more bitter lettuce, which that is also fine. And even if you use romaine lettuce, you should also try and have some of the stalks as well, because the stalks are generally more bitter than the leaves. Now, some people have both. They have lettuce and horseradish mixed together. But I'll point out there's some poskim, again, it's just some poskim. If that's your meaning, that's perfectly fine. Some poskim say you shouldn't do that because since we're not sure exactly what Chazal meant when they said morrow, there's a problem of one taste being mevatel the other taste. So if you have one, the case, I'm assuming that's one because that's one of the list. But if you have 2, then it could be that both being mevatel each other. But again, a lot of people have that meaning, and that's totally fine. So that's what I'm saying. The stalks generally are a bit bitter. So, yeah, that's why Romaine lettuce I think is a bit more. Right. So again, it doesn't have to be sharp. That's what people make a mistake to have horseradish because it brings tears. That's sharp. That's not bitter. So but moro is bitter. It's not sharp. Horseradish is more sharp than bitter, right? So the point is that's not. Now, charoises should be made before Shabbos. It should be red. It should be thick. If it's made only on Yom Tov, it should be done with a shinoi. First put in the water and then put in the rest of the stuff. And it should be a bit more of a blila raka, a bit more of a liquidy consistency. Lettuce, of course, has to be checked for bugs. It should be done before Shabbos. However, if you do it before Shabbos, make sure to try and dry off the lettuce. It shouldn't be in water because when you keep lettuce in water for 24 hours, it loses the little bit of bitterness which it already has, and therefore make sure that it's dry. And if you do, and horseradish should also be grated before Shabbos, but then it should be very tightly sealed, obviously, so it shouldn't lose its sharp taste. Okay, that's Mori. Let's talk about Korech quickly. Now, why can't one fulfill just his mitzvah of matzah and moro with Korech, right? It seems much simpler. We have a kazayis of matzah, moro, and then Korech. And the reason is because as we said, one taste can nullify another taste. And since moro nowadays is only the rabbanon, therefore it's not deraisa, and therefore the tam of moro is going to nullify the tam of matzah, and therefore we don't use that to fulfill all our chiyuvim. One should have a kazayis of each. That can definitely be a smaller. I forgot to point out the kazayis of moro. It's a bit harder to work out the kazayis of moro because it's hard, all the air pockets, right? Because the volume, it's hard to work out the kazayis. Place can say it's about 26 cubic centimeters. One very large leaf of romaine lettuce, most place can say will suffice. Now for korech, you can use a smaller share of each. You can have one kazayis of each. Now, contrary to popular opinion, korech does not necessarily have to be a sandwich, right? Now people do that again. It's one of these minhagim, which if you do that, it's perfectly fine. Sound like the rabbi. It's blasphemy. Korech doesn't have to be a sandwich. What are you doing? It doesn't say it has to be a sandwich. It has to be take matzah tomorrow. But korechim biyachad. Korechim, you go like this and you eat it, right? That has to be a sandwich. People do a sandwich. That's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with it. Just to point out that it doesn't have to necessarily be a sandwich. Okay.
It's fine.
To take a pita and they just wrap it, right? Okay.
And what about the volume of charosis?
The
volume of charosis.
how much charosis? So first of all, you're supposed to dip it. You're not supposed to put it on the lettuce. The whole point is to dip. It's one of the tibulin.
Yeah.
Right, and they say you shouldn't have too much. You just shake a bit off, right? It shouldn't be like, again, the point is to have a bit of the charosis taste, but not enough to get rid. So by all means, have it for the next 10 weeks after Pesach as your dip with your filter fish, right? But with your moro, then you shouldn't have too much. Now let's talk about Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is not just a regular meal, right? Very often we get Shulchan Aruch, oh, it's been magid, it's been thing, my head's spinning, right? And let's just enjoy ourselves. The Netziv points out that we know that you're not supposed to be mafsik ever in the middle of halal. Nothing after that. Shulchan Aruch literally comes in the middle of two parts of halal, right? So Shulchan Aruch is supposed to be a meal which has kedusha. It's supposed to be treated with kovid rosh. It's supposed to be treated not just even as a Yom Tov meal, but rather as an important part of the Seder. Of course, make sure not to overeat, so you have space, of course, for the afi kaiman, which, as we said, is the main mitzvah according to some opinions. And if you're totally stuffed by the time you get to the afi kaiman, not only is it hard to eat the afi kaiman, but possibly you don't even fulfill the mitzvah if you can't even look at matzah anymore. So therefore, for sure, one should leave space for the afi kaiman. One should be full. One should be satisfied because but one shouldn't be totally stuffed. Very, very important halacha. One should not eat any roasted meat or chicken on little seders. People shouldn't think that you're eating the actual korban tzli. Now, even meat roasted in a pot or roasted in an oven is a problem. And even if it's cooked in its own juices or brine, it's also a problem. The only meat one can have is if it's cooked in water or a lot of juice or something like that, where it's cooked and it's not roasted. We don't need the zraya on Seder night. Sorry, I should have clarified. You should eat the zraya the next day, in the morning. There's not on Seder night. Yeah, you don't need the zraya on Seder night. We said it's always a good thing to eat the zraya, and especially if you only cooked it at night, you should eat it the next morning. But an egg you're allowed to eat, because even a roasted egg, you want to mix up the egg with meat, right? So that's not a problem. That's how we eat the egg. But the zraya you shouldn't eat on Seder night.
Why is it it's the only time that you don't have roasted meat to avoid the meat?
Because
because it might
Because
resemble.
the issue of eating shlom bachut, the problem to eat shlom out of Yerushalayim, out of the klom, is a big problem. So even though it's a zeicha to have it on the seder plate, if you eat it, and people might think you're eating it, having in mind eating the korban pesach, and nowadays one isn't allowed to roast and eat a korban pesach out of Yerushalayim, we haven't got the Beis Hamikdash. That's the issue. There's an issue to eat shlom bachut, to eat it out of the klom of Yerushalayim. The issue, yeah, exactly, that's the issue. That's how. But we have the egg as a zeicha lechurban, but we're not allowed to. Again, nowadays we say that we haven't got kabbanas, and therefore, yeah, we don't do that.
You might have in mind that you're roasted meat.
You might have in mind, or it looks to Peter. There's even a halacha that you shouldn't even say. You know, I just remember from my childhood, right? Some mother made this massive, cut of roast, and we all, korban pesach. You're not even allowed to call meat a korban pesach. You know, even as a joke, you can't call it a korban pesach because it looks like you're literally calling it a korban pesach, right? Nowadays we haven't got a korban pesach, unfortunately, and therefore, and to eat a korban pesach nowadays out of Yerushalayim, or even in Yerushalayim, we don't know exactly where the places are. One isn't supposed to do nowadays. Now, let's just quickly finish off the Seder. Let's talk about soften. So we know there's a minhag that children steal the afikomen. Some gedolim frowned upon this minhag because it's teaching children to steal, and children are not supposed to steal. But again, it's a minhag which is accepted in the whole of Klal Yisrael. But I would say maybe don't use the terminology steal. Like say like chap or grab. Using the word steal is like a bit. Kids stealing the afikomen. Some person say at least don't use that word. Use like a bit of a nicer terminology than using the word steal. Now, very often your afikomen gets hidden under some pots or in your clothing cabinet or God knows where, on the roof, etc. And it's either lost or it comes back as matzah meal, right? And therefore you've lost your afikomen. Have no fear, although ideally one should eat the afikomen from the yachatz, from that matzah. If one loses it, or if that's a thing, then other matzah can get used. Now, for the afikomen, ideally, everyone should have 2 kazesim of matzah. And the reason is, one as a zeichel matzah, because this might be the ikka mitzvah, and one, which is the classic reason of zeichel korban pesach, which is also what the afikomen is, and therefore you should try and have it 2 kazesim. If you really can't, 1 kazayis is enough as well. Now, as we know, one should endeavor to try and have it before chatzos, but what I would say is, use your seichel, right? Don't drive yourself crazy and ruin your whole seder, which some people do because of chatzos. Now, matzah and moro definitely has to be before chatzos. But afikomen, again, sort of play by ear. That's why we say you should try and start as early as possible, but it's good to have it before chatzos. But if you can't, then it's okay. Some people make the t'nai of the avnei nezer. Now, what's the t'nai of the avnei nezer? I'll just very briefly explain. What's this whole chatzos business all about? There's a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva whether the cutoff point for korban pesach and for achilas matzah is chatzos or whether it's alois. Right now, we know you're not supposed to eat anything after the afikomen. So the Avnei Nezer came on to this fantastic bit. He said as follows. He said, if you see you're running late, what you do is as follows. In the middle of Shulchan Aruch, you just started the first course, you can't get to top. He says, have the kazayas of matzah, another kazayas of matzah, if you can stomach it, right, just before chatzos, and say, if the halacha is that I can only eat till chatzos, this should be the afikomen, and then to eat after chatzos isn't a problem because the whole din of not to eat after afikomen is only in the time where I can still eat that. I can still eat, right? If you wake up the next morning, you can have a coffee, right? That's a cutoff point. And if the cutoff point is not chatzos but rather alois, then I'm eating another kazayas of matzah, and I'm going to be yetzer with my afikomen later, and that's a t'nai one should make in his mind. After the afikomen, other than the 2 cups of wine he is drinking, only water or carbonated water may be consumed. Some places can say any drink which hasn't got like a heavy taste, tea, coffee, something like that, can also be consumed. If one goes to sleep on Pesach night and he wakes up thirsty, then the place can say he's allowed to have a drink. Let's just quickly finish off the Seder. We're up to Borich. Now, by Borich, there's a halacha you should wash out your bechers, even though for the second kois you don't have to wash out your bechers. The reason is because all it's had in there is grape juice, and therefore there's no reason why to wash it out. But after a meal, we're worried that crumbs, food fell in, and therefore you're supposed to wash it out, that it shouldn't be considered pogum. The minhag is that the balabayas benches on Seder night, even though usually a guest benches, on Seder night the minhag is toiv ayin hu yavorich, and since he's a toiv ayin, he's the one who's invited the guests, he's the one that should bench. Sorry? Even with Kahanim, the minhag is the balabayas benches. On Seder, specifically on Seder. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. That my great grandfather was very, very close to Rabbi Shapiro, the Rav Leblin, Rosh Yeshiva Chachmei Leblin. And one Shabbos he was hosting Rabbi Shapiro. And my great grandfather, he had a minig in his family. I don't know where the minig comes from. That also on Friday night the balabayas benches are not the guests. Now that was his minig. I'm not quite sure. It's my maternal great grandfather. So I haven't got this minig, but that was his minig. So one Shabbos Rabbi Shapiro had a wicked sense of humor. He's eaten by my great grandfather. My grandfather tells you, "I'm sorry, I would give you benching, but this is my minig." Usually somebody else picks up the kois. There's a minig for somebody else to pick up the kois for the person benching and to put it in his hands. Rabbi Shapiro picked up the kois as if he was giving it to my great grandfather. He put it in his other hand and he said, "Rabbi Sai, Mevelen benchen." Right? He benched. Okay. I'll give you the Rabbi Shapiro. So after benching, was that was going on? He says, "In my bench it says Oirich Mevar." Right? The halach is that the guest is supposed to bench, and therefore he wasn't having any of these minhagim Friday night. The guest benches. No, again, the reason why the guest bench is not to honor the guest. The reason is that the guest should bench the balabayas. So he wanted to have this, he wanted to be able to bench. My great grandfather, and therefore he benched. Okay, quickly with Halil. So there's a machlekes. Some people pour the fourth cup before Shvei Chamascha. Some people do it after. Some people say that even Halil should ideally be recited before Chatzos. Again, not so practical, but if you can, then okay. Balabayas, the halach is he leads his family with saying honor Hashem and Hoidu and Hoidu Hashem, etc. By the last kois, the one should try and actually finish off the whole kois, as opposed to the other koises when we said that roiv kois is enough. One should try and have the whole kois, so you can for sure say a bracha achrona after the fourth kois. I will just point out that although by Nirtzah very often people feel a bit woozy, people feel a bit tired, people can get a bit, a bit hyperactive and a bit thing, but remember it's all part of the Seder. Not a time to make chad gadi or animal noises or whatever else happens in people's houses. Shouldn't I want what happens in my house, right? Then again, it's all part of the Leila Seder, and it should be treated as much. I'll just finish off one final halacha. The minig in Klal Yisrael is saying it's halacha of Nirtzah and Halal and the rest of Seder night is that even though people are makbid during the rest of the year, especially when there's guests around, that women should not sing in front of other people, in front of strangers. The minig in Klal Yisrael has always been that on Seder night, the women join in the men with the singing, and that's okay. That's always been the minig. Actually once read a story. Some people also, when it comes to Zmiras Shabbos, the Yekkers, they say that the woman can also join in. The Zmiras Shabbos hasn't got a din of Pel Isha. The woman can join in the Zmiras. I once read Rev Ruderman recounted from Baltimore. Ruderman from Nei Yisrael, he recounted when he was a young Rav, or he wasn't even a Rav yet. He was in America. He was in a town in the USA. I can't remember which town. And he ate in a certain rabbi's house. And the rabbi told him, "I'm just, you're welcome. I'd love to have you in my house, but please note that my daughters like singing the Zmiras Shabbos with me. And if it disturbs you, then perhaps find someone else to do that." And he said the reason is because a few months ago, Reb Baruch Ber Lebovitz, right, the famous Gadol Hadori, the Rosh Yeshiva Branovitz, he was eating in my house, and my daughter started singing, and he ran out the house. Right? So, some people are very makbid not to hear. He has a huge Jewish shema. He didn't want to hear Kol Isha. But anyway, when it comes to Seder nights, for sure, the minig seems to be that the woman can join in with all the zmiris, with all the halal, and join in with the men. Okay. You're welcome. Leave. Thank you.
Just
a marathon. I was going to try and say some Divrei Agoda as well, but can't do everything. Huh?
2 kazayas is 2/3 of a matzah.
2 of a koimamias average koimamias matzah 2/3. Yeah.
That's 2 kazayas.
No, it's not true. No, sorry, it's not, because we said if you're having 2 kazaysim, you don't have to have the bigger kazayas. Just to clarify, the big kazayas is about 25 grams. A small kazayas is about we said 28, about 16 grams. Even if you're having 2 kazaysim, you can have. Some people say you should have 1 big kazayas and 1 small kazayas, which equals about 50 grams, just half a matzah. But I would tell you that even 2 small kazaysim is enough. So just 2 small kazaysim are only a bit bigger than 1 big kazayas. So have about 35 grams of matzah, and then you're a bit more than a third. In terms of your ordinary machine, sorry, you're talking about machine. A machine 1 kazayas is about 2/3. Yeah, 1 big kazayas. Yeah. It comes out, exactly. 2 kazaysim is only 2 small kazaysim is only a bit bigger than 1 big kazayas. So